What started as a board game from the 1980s, adapted at the time and created by a pioneering video game developer behind more than just one major strategy game, would first drop in 1991, originally dubbed a God game, before becoming a game that would define the 4X genre, our strategy gaming genre, and become one of the most successful gaming franchises of all time, and would come to be dubbed iconically Civilization. Civilization was a game brought forth by its lead designer and creator originally, Sid Meier, as a means of combining the classic Civilization board game with the popular Risk board game, adding the ability not to just fight for territory or exterminate, but explore, expand, and exploit the 4X 4 pillars. Civilization has been a dominant force on PC for decades, with the prior to the most recent entry, Civilization 6 back in 2016 reaching a whopping 11 million in sales, a near pipe dream for such a complex strategy genre. But more recently, as of a year ago at the time of this video in 2026, Civilization would have a new title drop, Civilization 7, one that was promised for the first time to introduce some new mechanics and game concepts never before seen in the franchise history. Civilization 7 would introduce the age system, a concept that would divide players' playtime up in a single campaign across multiple civilizations across 3 different ages of time, utilizing the same leader. This change would be unavoidable and change the very fabric of the Civilization franchise, helping put Civ 7 into a terrible state because of it, making it one of the lowest selling main series titles in years and currently sitting at 5 times lower population than Civ 6, a 10-year-old game, and half of Civ 5's population, a 16-year-old game. This was one of the highest profile examples of the main fan base of a franchise rejecting the most recent mainline title, and a catalyst reason for me covering Civilization on the Death of a Game series, a series where we investigate the largest contributing factors to the company or game's death or process of dying, utilizing a timeline of events filled with bits of evidence and clues in the form of developer testimonies, patch notes, and the game's reception, and finally, the most important ingredient, detective intuition. And so, detectives, Civilization still breathes, and a big promise update is said to come soon with no date yet announced that could potentially save things. But is it too late? Well, we will answer that as we crack this case. As a major fan of the series starting back in Civilization 5 and putting 1,000 hours plus into Civilization 6, I'm saddened to cover the newest entry, but happy that I feel qualified and enjoy the series at large. Choose your civilization and be prepared to choose it again, whether you want to or not. We have a case to cover, and it's Civilization 7, a civilization barely arguable that it was the worst Civ game in the series. The story begins coming off the launch of Civilization 6, and its massive success. Civilization 6 would score an 88% on Metacritic, and a similar score on Steam from over 100,000 users, and end up selling between 10 to 20 million copies, though that number falling closer to the 10 number. But the success of Civilization 6 might have seemed like it would bode well for the series as a whole, but arguably, it created more problems. For starters, as the lead designer Ed Beach would state, Civilization 6, including the DLC content, was the longest development cycle they had yet for a game, likely contributing to a lot of fatigue. Second, and what Ed didn't say, was that 2K, or Take-Two, would have expectations that they could do it again. And this was a mistake that you guys should be familiar with if you've seen the Command & Conquer episode, a mistake that Electronic Arts made as well. And what I mean by that is that these are well-selling series and games, sure, but it's actually even more impressive because they're niche and complex games that sell really well as well. The issue with this is that it gives you the illusion that you could do it again, and that it's very accessible, or in this case, even do more. Firaxis Games, or perhaps their parent company 2K, which they had been a part of since 2005 by the way, had big expectations being placed on them to perform for the next Civilization title due to the massive success of Civilization 6. I believe these expectations as later explained by the same Ed Beach, now in charge of the next Civilization title again, which is actually a rare feat for a lead designer in the Civilization franchise, as they often depart following their game's completion. Maybe a clue for later? This would lead to paths and decisions that Civilization 7 would take that would lead it to being even more controversial than Civilization Beyond Earth. Civilization 7 would be announced June 7, 2024 and was likely in development by this point for at least a solid 2 to 3 years, being in a near complete state, or so we thought. A new cinematic teaser trailer would accompany this announcement, and the trailer was, to be honest, kind of great. I enjoyed it because it had me excited for what was to come. I mean, sure, you could argue that some of the major features were teased, but I would argue that the game still looked like a classic Civilization game, at least in the sense of what was to come next after gameplay details would be revealed for Civilization 7. August 20th, 2024, and a major gameplay showcase would be unveiled. The trailer to reveal said gameplay was classic Civilization gameplay, showcasing how the ultimate allure to the game was choosing a civilization and attempting to make it stand the test of time. The new visuals, to be honest, I enjoyed at first glance, and this might be a debatable point I freely admit, because 6 had this more stylized gameplay, and it was far more popular than 5, the more realistic looking Civ game. 7 was a return to 5, with a more grounded looking visual scheme and much more effort put into the animations and zooms and shots. The new diplomacy, trade, and dialogue system or screen was briefly teased, and I mean briefly, but what was shown was certainly the weakest graphical presentation related effort yet, with the animated leaders looking mid to downright terrible. I mean, Caesar looks like Joffrey without a good barber.
He pushed your hairline too far back.
He fucked you up.
I know you could fuck up, but he fucked up real bad.
That nigga.
You gotta fight the barber. He pushed your shit back.
An arcade edition, likely named to lessen the impact of what it actually was, a mobile version, would be announced just days before the game would launch, which was wild. But sort of made sense when you considered the downgrade in some visual aspects, mostly the UI and leader related stuff as we will discuss more about later. But the mobile version being sneak announced in hindsight was a clue that we all should have taken more seriously, because that mobile version took resources that otherwise could have been put into the proper game, which would turn out to be a serious problem, as we would find out later on. It would also be for concessions, unless entirely different versions would be made, which was not common at all. But signs were already on display in more obvious ways too, when Firaxis would have to respond to feedback before launch due to a lot of criticism being aimed at the game's UI system, which some players got to test in advanced access. This testing period would create a wave of controversy, as Firaxis would initially incorrectly refer to it as an early access period before their fan base would bully them, rightfully so, into changing that to an advanced access, which is just, seems like word semantics, but exists due to the current climate and drama surrounding early access games. And although this response might seem like Firaxis had their finger on the pulse, they almost completely ignored and sidestepped the biggest criticism of the game yet, the age system, something we will cover very shortly. Civilization would launch on Xbox, PS5, and PC February 11th, 2025, and the response that came next would shock just about anyone who already wasn't familiar or following the game closely. Now, Civilization 7 had a typical critic and audience divide and differing opinion, at least typical whenever you encounter the more controversial AAA games, especially the more complex kinds that require more time investment, something that game reviewers just don't have. While Civ 7 would score a 79 out of 100 from 101 critics on aggregate review website Metacritic, the users would have an incredibly different reception, at an incredibly low 3.8 out of 10 user rating score, and rated at a 50% from 26,000 plus users on Steam. While Civ 6 had a rough launch, this launch for the Civilization franchise was different. The fan base was nearly outright rejecting the game, and I will detail why shortly. Let's investigate the gameplay in Civilization 7, something I feel quite comfortably doing considering I have thousands of hours of the series, and it's a series I thoroughly enjoy, so I'm not just looking at it from the Civ 7 lens. And well, because the critical reviews on the game are honestly only going to make me mad, which might be entertaining for you guys, but I want to focus on the meat here, and no, not that meat. Let's talk about the gameplay in Civilization 7. Civilization 7 did something no other Civilization game did. It attacked the very core of what it meant to be a Civilization game, as the name even said, and that was picking a civilization, as the trailers would say too, to stand the test of time, or for the sake of humankind. In Civilization 7, due to the age system, you would actually choose your leader, who would never change, and you would actually then have your civilization evolve and shift over time whether you wanted it or not. Since it wasn't toggleable, and since it now replaced the old core Civilization gameplay loop. This age system had 3 parts to it, and these 3 parts were shifting because they wanted you as the leader or the player to experience civilizations at their height of the powers historically, and then grow and morph around the leader instead. starting with the Antiquity Age, 4000 BC, and then transitioning to the Exploration Age in 400, and then finally the Modern Age between 1750 and 1950, which already created like tons of controversy, as they were chosen by Firaxis, arbitrarily, and not by players, like you could do in Europa Universalis, and that the Modern Age just ended right after World War II, eliminating any of the future tech and units from the game altogether. The way the age system actually functions is complicated, punishing, and unyielding, and I don't even really want to have to explain it, but bear with me. Each age lasts until the age progression bar will reach 200 points, and you get points, of course, by doing things throughout the transitions, and then all players transition to the next age altogether, though not before surviving a highly likely crisis event, which could test the civilization's stamina, of course. This process requires players to pick a new civilization influenced by your leadership choice, or prior accomplishments. Some things carry over, sure, but in a shocking way, some things just outright reset, such as unique units, tech trees, civics, and even more. Due to a poor UI and progression track system, players are confused which things are even kept and lost. According to lead developer Ed Beach, this system was introduced due to wanting to fix the problem of players abandoning games in Civ 6 and not seeing them through fully according to data. Beach and team also felt like there was too much micromanagement in the game as the late game became closer. I'm confused by this because in Civilization 7 you can't even progress to winning the game until you literally are at the final age of the game. So it's like you're playing 100 to 200 turns of not having the ability to even win, which is just utterly bizarre and seemingly accomplishes the opposite of what they wanted by making the game harder to actually finish. The new victory system instead was about completing like milestones, like it was a daily quest system from an MMORPG or something. This philosophy would lead to some more big changes besides the age system, such as builders being removed from the game and the UI system being overly simplified. The UI. Where to start with the UI? It's the most hated feature or aspect of Civilization 7, and I understand why as a major fan of the 6th game. What Civilization fans expected was a better or equal UI, which seems pretty reasonable. Instead, we got less details, less ability to access our idlers, and removed features such as auto explore, next unit move, the trade details being removed, and just so much more. And you can't help but feel that the reason that the UI looks so bad is because that it was playable on mobile and console, when there's basically no argument for doing it for PC reasons. And honestly, not a whole lot of an argument for why they have the exact UI anyway, except just trying to save time or cost. This angers the PC player base, and justifiably so, who is, by the way, the majority of the Civ fan base. The narrative event system. This was the new system that replaced the concept of builders in the game and tile improvement in the classical sense. The idea was kind of cool in theory, with a never-changing and unfolding narrative that would morph around your leaders in Civilization, allowing you to choose your fate, if you will. If this sounds familiar, it should, because this is like other 4X games like Crusader Kings with the event system, or like to a lesser degree, Europa Universalis with more of the DLC content. The problem is, in Civ 7, this amounts to nothing more than just random unrelated events that occur and not only have next to no flavor text, they essentially just become buffs or footnotes in your journey. The idea was that these were supposed to replace huts and villages, and you would normally encounter in, the normal games, I guess, and spruce things up a bit. But instead of being a cool what-if historical journey, where you now choose the story, it ends up being this vague reward system that removes the classic features that nobody asked for, a classic theme in Civilization 7. I'm not against having more story in Civilization, but if you guys were going to attempt an event or narrative system like this, you probably should have actually taken notes on your competition, because anyone who plays Civilization for this feature or encounters it is going to, if they played Crusader Kings for example, be like, what is this? Because Crusader Kings is much, much better. Districts. Districts would have a major overhaul that's kind of good depending on your view of it, though it has some negatives to it. Now urban tiles can hold up to 2 buildings, and this would allow for players to organically grow their cities in new directions in ways that they wanted to. The only negative of this otherwise positive change was that now that realistic art style and their choice of how to implement the district system sometimes would make tiles look like random sprawls of a city without any actual soul or cohesion to it. Commanders in combat. Now this is the best change that Civilization 7 would introduce, in my opinion, and that's the commander system. Commanders were like, Firaxis actually looked at 6 and thought, how can we make this better, and work from there in a more linear sense. Commanders would now allow for players to sack multiple, more than just one unit on the same hex, providing their benefit usually in a way of a buff to the stack of units. They can even heal now as a base and allow for players to customize them. This was great from Firaxis. It was like they took one of their competitors and actually learned from what they were doing employing an endless legend and their leader system, and then implemented like the best parts of it. The only problem, at least in my opinion, is just that endless legend does it better because it has a more detailed board game style of combat that's far more active than Civilization. At least in, my opinion. As a 4X enjoyer, art style, this one's a bit complex, so bear with me here. The art style in Civilization 7 is a return to the more realism-flavored art style that I talked about in Civilization 5. That's easy to understand. The hard part comes from why it ends up being sort of a bad thing. As graphical fidelity increases in an RTS or strategy game, it might seem like the best solution is just to max that dial out. But there's some serious issues that happen because of this, regarding visual clarity and how players' eyes are able to read information for long periods of time. Essentially, in my eyes, since I like the actual art style in Civ 7, I'll explain. Civ 7, good art style or not, picked an exhaustive art style that requires too much visual focus for players in a game that they have to manage like 100 things at the same time. Throw in the bad UI, and this makes for a visually tepid experience, compared to Civ 6's colorful and vibrant approach, which might be controversial for some OG fans, sure, but this was the series' best-selling art style. Straying too far from it was kind of needless, and thus Firaxis seemingly unknowingly walked into a serious problem that they couldn't walk out of. It's like that scene in Neverending Story. It's so sad. Childhood. The first update to hit Civilization 7 would come quickly, and it was making balance changes regarding the geography, wind condition. Something a launched game shouldn't really be seen doing. I mean, sure, there's new wind conditions being introduced, but you should have this stuff already figured out through testing. More controversially, this update would also unveil the first DLC collection dubbed the Crossroads of the World, and include 2 new leaders, Ada Lovelace and Simon Bolivar, as well as 4 new civilizations in Carthage, Great Britain, which was shockingly absent from the base game, which is nuts, Nepal, and Bulgaria. $30 though for 2 new leaders and 4 new civilizations was wild. That was on top of, oh, did I mention they were charging $70 for this game? Quadruple A or whatever. The base game came with 30 civilizations, though you could only pick 10 selectable per age. So technically kind of like 10, and you wanted people to pay for nearly half the game's price for just 4 more? And then another update would drop, and it's filled with more quality of life changes for broken UI aspects, performance issues, and more balanced stuff, which begins to make Civilization 7 look even more like it needed way more time in the oven. Update 1.20 would introduce the one more turn feature, sorely missing at launch, and yet again, looking like a pre-launch update. If it seems like I'm being harsh, remember, I'm not the only one thinking this way. The game started at 84,000 players peak, and within just a few months was already at 18,943. A shocking revelation for a series that had been on top for a decade. And remember, they're charging $70 for it. Update 1.21 would try to fix the game's mapping issues, which was another issue I didn't even get to, which would turn every map, by the way, into, regardless of variety, a water fort map. And attempt to balance the AI in Civilization 2, which, by the way, might be the worst in the series yet. And I have a theory as to, or idea as to why. I think the age system is so convoluted and complicated it even confuses deity-level AI in Civilization 7, the highest difficulty in the game. A difficulty that even players I know about, who aren't serious Civilization players, would essentially never dream of playing, and yet are completing deity level in Civilization 7 easily. The balance was completely out of whack here, and for players like me, that was a deal breaker. Update 1.2.2 would introduce the large and huge map options, another missing feature, and personally, one of my favorites. Oh, and it also allowed for the game to actually be customized regarding custom options. The thing that every Civilization 6 player does before booting up a new game. You can't sell people on a sequel that's so limited, that months after launch you're still barely adding things to the game that it had from 10 years prior, especially when that sequel took literally 3 years or more to reach the same population on Steam that Civ 7 currently had according to Steam charts. 3 whole years. A game that, as of June 2025, the time that the update came out, had nearly 5 times Civilization 7's population. But Firaxis was on their post-launch content cycle track, regardless of their results or the audience reception, and would announce another $30 DLC, Right to Rule. While these DLCs would promise more leaders or civs, they would actually be incremental releases over time, meaning that you were actually paying full price for just a little bit of content with the promise for it later. Almost a year after launch, and with update 1.3.1, and then Firaxis was still barely introducing the Tides of Power DLC, another $30 DLC, which meant in around a year, the game went from being just expensive already at $70 to $130, which almost seems criminal in a sense when the population of the game had just tanked to 12,000 players peak. Update 1.3.2 would introduce mini tooltips, something strangely MIA again, but teased in the future to come was a major update to hit Civilization 7 titled Test of Time. This new update, as the name implied, was a return to the classic Civilization, or at least that was the idea behind it. Set to release sometime in the spring of 2026, the Test of Time update would allow for players to play as one of the civilizations throughout all of the game, which might sound like a full solution being offered here, but it wasn't. Instead, players could only keep part of their kit and aspects depending on which age they were in. You could also still choose to change your civilization if you wanted, even using the Test of Time update or mode or whatever it was, so it's like a more partial solution or a band-aid fix. If anything, the best part of the update, in my opinion, was changes to how victories worked in the game, allowing you to actually progress towards them while not being in the modern or final age of the game. For some players, this was a moment to champion Firaxis again, claiming they were finally listening to feedback, or at least the content creators mostly. But if anything, Firaxis was still clinging to their previous game design as much as possible, and to be fair, I understand why. If they unravel all of the new Civ 7 aspects, they unravel Civ 7. It's reliant on being those things, to be unique, and to make its 1-2 punch. Without those things, it's not a good Civilization game when compared to its competition and even previous titles. That's why things like the syncretism system are still being promised, a system that allows you to recruit other unit types from other civs, something that Endless Legend did with a mercenary system, but apparently that was too complicated to be used here. Interesting commentary that would be released from lead developer Ed Beach, where he would talk about wanting to preserve the 1/3 rule, where you want to keep like 1/3 of the game the same, improve 1/3 of it, and then introduce 1/3 new concepts or approaches and features, and then admit that they failed at that task. A task that he was in charge of, by the way. A strange admission. Instead of taking accountability though, and then admitting it in testing phases where you had time to make changes, and after even showing it in public showings and people were decrying the system in chat as it was being streamed. Beach would instead claim that he urged 2K and Firaxis to go to early access, which just puts a soap taste in my mouth. Ugh. Gross. A multi-billion-dollar company, or gaming publisher, and a near $60 million revenue company in Firaxis games, choosing a route that made sense for people who didn't have that kind of money in the first place. Beach and Shirk would also claim that they felt Civilization had a difficult position, being unable to please everyone, and wanting to do so because, well, they were special and wanted to make more money. But the problem is that the previous design stuff aside, Civilization 7 is just full of other games' features, and not implemented in memorable or useful ways to the series. It makes the game feel more like they tried to reach for more pocketbooks than reach for the stars. I mean, all they really had to do was just take a look at what the most popular mods were for Civ 6, make a list of it, and then think, okay, let's action upon these and whatever else is missing after that. And even that would have been a better game than Civ 7 and make more sense as a sequel to Civ 6. In this process, not only did you fail to do your homework to make sure these implementations would be liked or even requested in the first place, you essentially tried to create a Civilization game in a vacuum, divorced from public perception, and continued to defend it well into the game's launch. That means you failed. The game failed. Civilization 7 was a big failure. It sold 1/10 or so of the previous game, and as of the time of this video, has less than 10,000 players playing it at peak. And Firaxis seemingly going bossing say on this shit wasn't helping matters either, and wasn't helping people have more trust in the further vision for Civ 7, especially when Civ 5 and 6 were still right there, with fully completed games, tons of content and DLC, and a mod scene to boot. Now, both of these Civ games dwarf the most recent Civilization, and that's called the market teaching you a lesson, old man Firaxis. Nobody wanted this as badly as you guys seemingly did. But who knows? Who would have thought trying to make Civilization 7 Crusader Endless kind of empires would be rejected by your audience, a Civilization audience? A mistake corporations seem to routinely make with strategy games, as if they forget their britches as soon as the game sells a few million copies, or just don't forget about nuances and demand success regardless. Strategy games, especially 4X games, are niche, and that's okay. The more we try to make one or more of them like another game in the genre, or reach for players way outside of it, we lose the essence of what makes those games so addictive, and what makes one more turn almost like a curse or a mantra for 4X enjoyers. As of the spring of 2026, Test of Time still hasn't been released, the long-promised update meant to try and save the bleeding $70 game. But some people have gotten their hands on it in testing, and the results are just about as you probably expected. The diehards are defending the billion-dollar corpo who released an unfinished game on Civilization's subreddit. They're out in droves, and largely positive about a few aspects of the new update. But being the only ones remaining usually makes you the loudest and sometimes wrongest, if you will. The more rational heads are saying that the update is a little too late, and not even a full compromise being offered, but more so a partial one. And the more passionate others are saying, I think respectfully, let's teach them a lesson. Play another civilization, any civilization, and let them know that nobody wanted Civ 7. But as of April 2026, the Test of Time update is still not out, and with no updates as to when it's supposed to be set to update, and with an even more dwindling player base, the future of Civilization 7 is not looking bright, despite not facing an immediate death just yet. The timeline has ended though, detectives, and while Civilization 7 isn't dead yet, I don't actually see it making a major comeback, even with the Test of Time update. I simply think that 5 and 6 are just better games, and 6 is a far more approachable for a broader group of gamers than 7 is anyway, so it beats it at that whole selling point. And so, why was Civilization 7 the biggest failure in the franchise history? Yes, even more than Beyond Earth. It epically failed the 1/3 rule. It borrowed a lot without mastering anything. Horrible UI, the age system nobody wanted, overly monetized and underdelivered, a conflicted identity. Those last words echo quite true, as the Test of Time awaits Civilization 7 in the near future. No pun intended, with promises to revitalize the game. But even if the Test of Time update somehow manages to do that, it does so by attacking the very core identity of what Civilization 7 was supposed to be, and what it stood for, and will only succeed because it brings the game closer to what the rest of the series is about. And if it does, I'll be there to chronicle it, just like I did with Final Fantasy XIV. But I'm doubtful. Thanks for watching, detectives, and let me know your thoughts on Civilization 7 if you had the chance to play it, and why not, if you didn't. Until the next case.
Woohoo!